President Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso is currently facing two major battles, one against terrorism and another against the influence of Western media. Since taking power and positioning himself as strongly anti-imperialist, Traoré has faced increasing criticism from international outlets, especially those with ties to France, who accuse him of authoritarianism, particularly after the recent arrest of 8 Burkinabe journalists. While these media houses quickly labeled him a dictator suppressing free speech, they largely ignored his efforts to rebuild the military and fight terrorism. The situation highlights a deeper struggle over who controls the narrative in Burkina Faso, Traoré's government or foreign media interests. One day in September 2024, the US suddenly decides that a Russian news channel called RT shouldn't be allowed to operate in Africa anymore. Just like that, no heads up, no conversation with any African country. They didn't even ask, they just pulled the plug. Now here's where it gets weird. The US is always talking about how much it loves freedom of speech, right? It's like their favorite phrase. But banning a news outlet from a whole continent without talking to the people who live there, that doesn't really scream freedom of speech, does it? But wait, there's more. It wasn't just RT that got kicked out. About 20 African media pages on different social media platforms also disappeared. Why? Because the US said their opinions didn't match what America wanted to hear. They claimed these African outlets were spreading Russian propaganda. Did they show any actual proof? Nope. Lately, African countries have been building closer relationships with places like Russia and China instead of the West. And instead of asking why that's happening, the US jumped to this wild theory. Oh, Russia must be brainwashing Africans with fake news. Seriously, that's like assuming Africans can't think for themselves. But they can. And they do. Maybe, just maybe, people are tired of one-sided partnerships with Western countries that haven't brought real progress for decades. And here's the part that really gets people talking. When the US silences media it doesn't like, no one in the West calls it censorship. Not a peep. But let an African government do something even slightly similar, and suddenly it's all over the headlines, free speech under attack. So now it starts to feel like there's a whole different rule book depending on who you are. Just the other day, something strange happened. All of a sudden, a bunch of big Western news outlets that usually don't say much about Burkina Faso started talking about the same thing. And not just talking, they were all using almost identical headlines. Burkina Faso journalist kidnapped after speaking out about press freedom. So here's what went down. 2 well-known journalists in Burkina Faso, Guezuma Sanogo and Bukari Awoba, got arrested. This happened about 2 weeks after they spoke up about how bad things have gotten for the press in their country. Both of them are big names. They lead the Association of Journalists of Burkina Faso, AJB. In fact, Sanogo had just been elected president of the whole group. At a special meeting of journalists, Sanogo didn't hold back. He said that the current government, run by a military group called the Junta, was totally controlling the public media. According to him, the news in Burkina Faso wasn't news anymore. It had been turned into a megaphone for the people in power. Basically, no more freedom of speech, just government talk. The AJB as a whole agreed, saying this kind of crackdown on journalists had never happened before in the country's history. And then, just 3 days later, Sanogo and Woba were taken by security forces. They were at the Norbert Zongo National Press Center in the capital, Ouagadougou, when it happened. One moment they were there, the next, gone. No one knew where they were being held or what condition they were in. That's when Western media started paying attention. News organizations across Europe and the US started reporting on the arrests. Media groups and press freedom organizations joined in too, calling for their immediate release. Sadibou Marong, who works with Reporters Without Borders in sub-Saharan Africa, didn't mince words. He said what's happening in Burkina Faso looks like a plan to shut up anyone who dares to speak out. He compared these arrests to others that have happened since the military took over. Marong also pointed out something important. The government keeps saying it's doing all of this in the name of fighting a war. But in reality, he says, they're just using that excuse to go after journalists and kill off free speech. He wasn't the only one to speak out. Big journalist organizations like the International Federation of Journalists, IFJ, and the Federation of African Journalists, FAJ, also jumped in. Omar Farouk Osman, president of the FAJ, said it loud and clear. It's outrageous. Journalists are being targeted, threatened, and thrown in jail, not for committing crimes, but for standing up for honest reporting. And Anthony Bellinger, head of the IFJ, called on the authorities to back off. He said Burkina Faso needs to stop silencing journalists and start honoring its promises to protect free speech and let people speak freely without fear. Some of the biggest journalism groups in the world just sent out a serious message. The International Federation of Journalists, IFJ, and the Federation of African Journalists, FAJ, are standing strong with reporters in Burkina Faso. And they're not keeping quiet about it. They're asking every journalist union across Africa, plus labor groups and global press freedom defenders, to step up and speak out. Loudly. They want the whole world to know what's going on and to rally behind the two journalists who were locked up without cause. Meanwhile, Human Rights Watch dropped a report that adds even more weight to the story. They didn't just talk about those two journalists. They mentioned 4 different reporters who've been arrested under the current leadership in Burkina Faso. But it doesn't stop there. According to the report, many other journalists aren't even around to tell their stories anymore. Why? Because they had to run, literally leave the country. They were getting threats of jail time, being tortured, disappearing without a trace, or even being forced into the military just for doing their jobs, reporting the truth. Now, hearing all this, it's easy to jump to conclusions. If we were only going by the news headlines coming out of the West, we might paint Burkina Faso's President Traoré as some kind of tyrant, someone hungry for power, silencing anyone who speaks up. But here's the thing, we know better. Let's take a step back and really think this through. Yes, President Traoré did have those journalists arrested. That much is true. But just before it happened, he gave a speech that caught a lot of people's attention. In it, he said something kind of chilling. There's a battle going on, not with guns, but with words. He warned that outside powers could use the media to light a fire in the country and stir up chaos. And now, look at what's happening. The media, after all, is powerful. It can shape how people think, change public opinion, even bring down governments. That's why, whenever there's a coup or a major political shakeup, one of the first places the military takes over is the national TV or radio stations. Control the message, and you control the mood of the people. In places where democracy is strong and stable, people can speak freely. They can criticize leaders without fear. But Burkina Faso isn't in that place right now. It's dealing with serious problems. Decades of underdevelopment, violence from armed groups, and a long list of broken promises from politicians, many of whom have close ties to the West, especially France. In this kind of situation, the media becomes even more powerful, because it can either calm the fire or pour gasoline on it. And if foreign interests or ousted politicians want to cause trouble, the media is their loudest tool. With just a few headlines or reports, they can make people question everything, turn against the government, and even spark rebellion within the military. That's how quickly things can unravel. So what does a leader do when he sees that danger coming? Well, a strong leader who believes he's working to protect his country might try to get ahead of it. He might say, "Nope, we're not letting that happen." That could mean tightening control over the press and keeping the narrative in check, even if it means arresting journalists who are seen as stirring the pot. And if you really look closely at the journalists who were taken in, there's something they all seem to share. None of them have ever shown public support for the soldiers risking their lives on the front lines. These soldiers, mind you, are everyday people, fathers, brothers, sons, fighting to protect their country from chaos. Some of them die doing it, their families mourn, their fellow soldiers carry on, and life moves forward. But the media? Instead of offering encouragement or gratitude, some reporters focus on what's going wrong, what the army hasn't done, or what they think Traoré is doing badly. That kind of talk, some would argue, doesn't help. It creates tension, it plants doubt. And in a fragile country like Burkina Faso, it could spark something much bigger than just debate. It could lead to mutiny or collapse. President Traoré has made it pretty clear. He's not okay with anyone criticizing the military's efforts to fight terrorism. In his mind, they're doing the hard work of defending the country, and they deserve respect, not public bashing. This actually reminds a lot of people of something that happened last year. A well-known doctor criticized the military on social media. He posted that the army wasn't doing enough to fix the country's security problems. Traoré saw the post, and instead of firing back with words, he took a different approach. He called the doctor in, then told his officers, "Take him to the front lines." And that's exactly what they did. They gave him military gear, trained him, and sent him out to see what it was really like. The idea: if you think the army isn't doing enough, come see for yourself and help. And now people are wondering, are the arrested journalists about to face the same kind of challenge? When you're leading a country, especially one at war, you sometimes have to make calls that won't win any popularity contests. You weigh risks, protect what you believe is important, and hope history understands your reasons. Let's talk about something that most people don't even think about: the power of the media. Like real power. Not just spreading the news, but shaping how people think, what they believe, and even who they trust. It's the kind of power that can lift up a leader or tear one down. And that's exactly what's unfolding in Burkina Faso right now. President Traoré knows the game. He knows that before anyone tries to remove a leader, either through a secret plot or an actual military takeover, they start with the message. They take over the story. They control what people hear, see, and feel. If you can control the story, you can control the people. That's the first move. That's why Traoré has been warning about what he calls a war on communication. He wasn't talking about tweets or press releases. He meant a full-blown strategy where outside forces, especially from the West, yes, including France, use the media to quietly build chaos from the inside. The formula's pretty simple. 1. Use local allies and foreign media to paint Traoré as the villain. 2. Get the public frustrated and confused. 3. Divide the military, spark unrest, and then, boom, he's out. It's been done before in other countries. Traoré knows it's coming. The same Western countries that talk non-stop about freedom of the press understand this media strategy better than anyone. Look at the US and Russia. They're always pointing fingers at each other for spreading propaganda. But really, both sides are doing the exact same thing. They're creating their own versions of the truth, shaping how people see the world. And the average person? Most of the time, they don't even notice it's happening. They believe they're forming their own opinions, when in reality, they're just repeating what they've been told. It's no different when it comes to China. Many people in the West have grown up believing that China is some terrible, oppressive place, that it's all strict rules and no freedom. But the funny thing is, when apps like TikTok took off, and people in the US realized it was built by a Chinese company, some started asking questions. Wait, if China is so bad, how come their app is better than ours? Some even started wondering if everything they'd been told about China was really true. People in China? They're not out on the streets every day begging for freedom. A lot of them are proud of how far their country has come, and they don't feel nearly as oppressed as they've been portrayed. So back to Burkina Faso. Instead of lifting up the country, some journalists inside are focused on pointing fingers at the military and claiming that freedom of speech is under attack. But what about the soldiers out there putting their lives on the line every day? What about morale? What about unity? Instead of standing with the people trying to protect the country, some reporters are feeding the exact kind of negativity that outside forces can use to destabilize everything. That's why Traoré has taken a firm stand. He's not just fighting terrorism on the ground, he's fighting it in the airwaves, in the headlines, and on the internet. When journalists spread messages that seem more about division than truth, he sees that as part of the bigger information war. And yes, he's not afraid to make bold moves. Like when he reportedly told those arrested journalists that they could soon be joining soldiers on the front lines. Western outlets called it illegal conscription, but Traoré sees it differently. If you're going to criticize the fight, maybe you should understand what that fight really looks like. To fight back against all the misinformation, Traoré, along with the leaders of Mali and Niger, launched something brand new, AES TV, their own web-based television network. They introduced it to mark the one-year anniversary of the Sahel Alliance, also known as AES. The idea? Take control of the message, tell their own stories, push back against the flood of foreign media that, in their eyes, keeps painting them in the worst light. French news stations like France 24 and others have already been kicked out of their countries. Now, with AES TV, they're building their own platform where they can speak directly to the world. No middleman, no filter. According to an official from Mali's communication department, this new channel is just the start. They want to break through the fog of disinformation and finally give people a chance to hear their version of events. They're tired of being treated like the bad guys in a story someone else is writing. Things are moving fast in the Sahel. According to Ibrahim Traore, a top advisor to Mali's Minister of Communication, everything is locked in place for the launch of AES TV, the new digital channel for the Sahel Alliance. "We're ready," he said. "All we're waiting for now is the green light from the leadership." This all started when Mali's president, Assimi Goïta, announced during a major address to the AES bloc that it was time for the region to have its own voice, a media platform created by and for the people of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. Soon after that announcement, the communication ministers from the three countries got to work. By August 2024, they had already mapped out a joint communication plan. Just 3 months after that, something big happened. On December 28, 2024, Burkina Faso's Minister of Communication, Gilbert Pingwende Ouedraogo, landed in Bamako. He wasn't there for just another meeting. He was there for the official kickoff of AES's new web TV. Think about it. In less than 90 days, 3 different countries came together, made a plan, and launched a full media platform. That's no small feat. It shows what can happen when African nations align on a common goal and actually move as one. The idea behind this TV station? Simple: share real-time, accurate news that people can trust and promote messages that build awareness across the region. This isn't just about TV, it's about telling their story, their way. At the launch event, communication ministers from Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger stood together, ready to flip the switch. They also agreed on the look and feel of the channel, its design, branding, and long-term goals. Not just for television, but for future radio projects too. All of this came after a major workshop that laid the groundwork for the launch. That event was opened by Mali's Minister of Communication and Digital Economy, Alhamdou Ag Ilyane. He was joined by big names in regional media, including Aterida Galip Som, the head of Burkina Faso's national broadcaster, and Saidou Daura, a top media advisor from Niger's National Council of Public Safety. After the workshop wrapped, the public broadcasters from all 3 countries signed a major agreement. It wasn't just a handshake, it was a formal commitment to work together more closely, especially in the world of television and radio. Their goal? Build a stronger, united media front across the Sahel. More updates have come in about the launch of AES TV, and they're pretty exciting. Turns out, a lot more is happening behind the scenes than most people realize. A key document that officially outlines how AES will run both its TV and radio operations has now been completed by media experts. That document is getting ready to land on the desks of the communication ministers from Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. And it doesn't stop there. 3 different design drafts for the AES brand and visual identity have been created. The ministers will review all of them and choose the one they think is best to recommend to their heads of state. Now let's just pause for a second and recognize how big this is. In a region that's often underestimated or misunderstood, the quick and professional rollout of AES TV is proof that when African nations come together with purpose, they get things done. It's not just about broadcasting news, it's about reshaping the story that's being told about them. Because let's be honest, for a long time, countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have had to deal with a flood of outside media, pushing narratives that don't always reflect the reality on the ground. Stories framed in distant studios, usually in Washington, London, or Paris, often twist facts, question leadership, or completely overlook the struggles and sacrifices of local people. And that's exactly why these nations have started pushing back. Back in October 2024, Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traore made a bold move. He announced that the US-funded media outlet Voice of America, VOA, was suspended from operating in Burkina Faso. Why? Because of a segment aired in September that many in the country found deeply offensive. In that broadcast, a panel discussion was held about the security situation in the Sahel. But instead of offering real context or empathy for the people living through violence and chaos, some panelists praised actions by groups considered enemies of the state, referring to recent attacks in Bamako as courageous. Let that sink in. Soldiers are out there risking their lives every day. Families are dealing with fear, loss, and instability. And meanwhile, people who live comfortably in the US, far from any danger, are casually applauding violence on live radio. The Supreme Communications Council in Burkina Faso didn't take that lightly. They said it directly. This kind of reporting doesn't just misinform the public, it damages the morale of the troops who are trying to protect the country. And they're not wrong. When you're on the ground, facing daily threats, the last thing you want to hear is a global broadcast cheering on the people trying to harm your nation. But this isn't just about one broadcast. It's about a long pattern of one-sided storytelling. It's about a mindset that says, we know better than you, even when Western media outlets don't live with the consequences of their words. This is the same superiority complex that's been around for generations. It shows up in reporting, in politics, and in policy, where the global North assumes it has the right to speak for the global South. That's why AES TV matters. It's more than just a channel. It's a microphone being passed back to the people who've been talked about for too long without ever being invited to speak for themselves. And as for the suspension of outlets like VOA, the West might call it censorship or an attack on press freedom. But to many people in Burkina Faso, it's something else: self-defense. A leader standing up for his country, saying enough is enough to narratives that do more harm than good. What do you think about this shift in media power across the Sahel? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you have to say. And if you found this interesting, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay tuned for more updates.